want to see something really scary?
You bet.
I'll tear your soul apart.
Jesus Christ!
No, it's not.
Now, was that civilized? No, clearly not. Fun, but in no sense civilized.
You know, I start and I just don't know when to stop. I just felt I couldn't keep it all in one video, so I just had to do a part 2. I promise at the end of it I will tag 2 more YouTubers to talk about their favorite in all the great horror subgenres. But I feel like the first video was a tad rudimentary, and I feel like we could go a bit deeper after all. That's why this is Deep Cuts, the show that cuts deep into the heart of horror. But let's face it, a lot of these subgenres are pretty well deeply ingrained into our subconscious when we think of the horror genre. So let's get started. A lot of people don't really tend to think of this as anything else but another addition to the slasher genre, and to their credit, they are a bit right. But I feel like there has been so many in this particular subgenre that I feel that we need to draw attention to it a bit more. Specifically, the summer camp genre. Friday the 13th franchise, practically its bread and butter is summer camp. But there were a lot of other films, some that came before, some paralleled it, and all these films really deserve their attention too. Certain ones that come to my mind are, of course, The Burning, which is a great example, one that actually took it extremely seriously, and I was very impressed for that. Another film that, in a way, was kind of a spiritual brother to the Burning, because it was also inspired by the Cropsey legend, was the film Madman that introduced Madman Mars. That's another one that also involves a killer stalking in a summer camp. If there's any film that I feel really does not only do something wonderful with the summer camp genre, but frankly, I think does the best job recreating the summer camp experience.
I've been at a sleepaway camp for almost 3 weeks, and I'm getting very scared.
I gotta give love to Sleepaway Camp. I am not sorry. Sleepaway Camp is amazing. I love everything about Sleepaway Camp, and anyone who dares try to shame me on that, I will bite my thumb at you, and drink a bit of wine. So much has been said about the ending, but really I think that takes away from why this film is so brilliant. Sleepaway Camp is one of those rare examples where a filmmaker, you get the vibe that the filmmaker may not be up on all the things you maybe should or should not do when it comes to making films on a technical level or on an editorial level. But somehow, some way, all these wrong elements come together to make this glorious whole. The film is not scary by any metric, but my God, the things that happen in this film are so one of a kind. I have never seen another campground horror film that has done what Sleepaway Camp does. There are moments in this film that just focus on kids being kids. It's very seldomly I ever see a horror film portray kids in such a way where I look at it and go, yeah, kids do that. And it didn't matter if the acting was like Oscar caliber. What mattered is that the acting matched the tone of the film it was trying to tell. In any other movie, this kind of acting style would be like, what the fuck are you doing? But in Sleepaway Camp, it works. Even freaking Aunt Martha.
Hurry, sweeties! We don't want to be late for the boss! Goodness, no. No, that wouldn't do at all.
Sleepaway Camp is a classic, and if you have not seen it, you are seriously depriving yourself. But with this train of thought, I felt the need to veer into a little pearl of wisdom from John Waters when he said there's no such thing as bad movies, there's just boring movies. If a film is truly bad, why the fuck are you still talking about it? And if there is any genre of film that has trotted out so many examples of so bad it's good, it's the horror genre. And if there's one film that I feel really encapsulates this concept, it is
Shopping Mall, where shopping costs you an arm and a leg.
Chopping Mall is another one from the wheelhouse of Roger Corman. That alone should give you a pretty good idea as to what kind of film this is going to be. This film started off being called Killbots. This film there's no reason for this film to be called Chopping Mall. There is no chopping involved. When you see a title like Chopping Mall, you think it involves a serial killer in a mall with a bunch of kids, which that alone is not a bad premise in itself. But no, this one decides to throw in freaking killer security bots. And that there is nothing more to it than that, but yet for some reason this film is thoroughly entertaining. I watch it so many times, and I can point out all the reasons why this is a dumbass movie. There's so many bad decisions. There are so many things where I'm just going, how the hell this works? There's so many aspects of it where I'm going, there's no way any of this would fit in the real world. There's no way a mall would pony up that kind of dough to have this kind of security. And yet the film says we don't give a shit. This is a movie with kids trapped in a mall with a bunch of homicidal security bots. And it is absolute bliss. With its bevy of stock characters, with some stand-up performances though, I will say, particularly from Barbara Crampton. Now, she's playing the common panicky slasher victim character, but the thing is, it's Barbara Crampton playing that character. Normally she plays characters who are actually very intelligent and very savvy. I've never once watched a Barbara Crampton performance in any other movie but this one, where I'm going, what the fuck are you doing, you idiot? But yet Barbara Crampton gave her all to this role, and I'm going, you deserve a medal. And then of course you got the great heroine performance by Kelly Maroney, who I'll still maintain delivers one of my favorite badass lines in horror history.
Have a nice day.
I have no regrets about saying I love this movie with a fiery passion, and if you have any sort of sense of fun, you will too. Now, commonly this subgenre is associated with slashers, again, for understandable reasons, but interestingly enough, the way they go about it in this regard doesn't always seem to extend to the tropes of the slasher genre, which leads me to realize that cannibals are really a subgenre all to themselves. There are other examples of cannibals in other movies where it's not a matter of whether or not they're slashers or not. Of course, one of the most notorious examples is Cannibal Holocaust, but if there's one cannibal-themed film which I will say I absolutely fell madly in love with the first time I watched it.
Well, you know as well as I do, it takes all kinds of critters to make
Farmer Vincent fritters.
Motel Hell is a film that when you hear the title and when you even look at even the trailer of the film, you don't think there's going to be anything of it. You think it's going to be just, grindhouse trash. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm just like so drunk on its ridiculousness that I just forgave all that. But really, there is so much good in this movie that I just couldn't ignore it. Firstly, the epicenter of the film is the performance by Rory Calhoun as Farmer Vincent. It's one thing to make a character threatening, but I gotta say, I love it when a horror film makes your focal killer character not only, either sympathetic, but to make them so enjoyable that there's a little part of you that never wants them to stop doing what they do. And not only do you have Farmer Vincent doing it, but you have him with his sister Ida. This whole movie could have been just about them, and I would have been perfectly satisfied if the movie ends with them just going on doing what they do. The ending is still so satisfying regardless, even with the crazy ass chainsaw fight with Farmer Vincent for some reason wearing a pig head, and you don't know why. I mean, granted, it does lead to a great image. When it comes to the subgenre of cannibals, this is a film that has an incredibly well thought out concept to the idea. Now, Farmer Vincent and his sister Ida, not only do they run a motel, but they also run a celebrated meatpacking company. They are pillars of their community. People love them. And then when you find out the deep dark secret of how they work.
Hey, you could smoke their tongues.
I tried that. The texture's all wrong. Won't mix with the pork.
It actually still sticks in your mind, even though the film is incredibly funny. When the film wants to get dark and when the film wants to get creepy, it gets creepy in all the right ways. I mean, it's one thing, just the idea that they're trapping people and, grinding them up to make meat. I mean, Texas Chainsaw 2 did that. But this one goes not just a step further, but a freaking football field further, where Farmer Vincent will take random drifters, bury them to their necks, sever their vocal cords so they can't talk, and force feed them until they're fat enough, and then harvest them. And all the scenes where you see them, the way they work and the way they do things, that's eerie as shit. And the film's absolutely devious tongue-in-cheek humor, which I got absolutely drunk on when I watched this. Now, of course, I've talked ad nauseum about my love of Hannibal and of Hannibal Lecter as a character as a whole. Now, whereas Hannibal Lecter actually gave a really profound psychological angle to the concept of cannibalism, Motel Hell made it look like a lot of fun. What the fuck does that say about me? But of course, since we're talking about Hannibal Lecter, of course we're going to veer onto another subgenre of film, the serial killer genre. Now, see, when people think of serial killer films, they think of police procedurals. They could think of films like trying to delve into the inner workings of a killer to try and find out how they tick in order to find out how to catch them. That's a subgenre all to itself. Of course, another notable example is the film Seven, but the one that, and yes, this to me is a horror film, for the simple fact that it has an icon, because all the great horror films have an icon.
Thank you, Clary. Thank you.
I love Hannibal Lecter. I love the works of Thomas Harris. I love the TV show Hannibal. I love it so much, I'm even making a Shakespearean adaptation of this film.
Good morrow.
Doctor, I'm Clarice Starling.
By way of Jack Crawford hast thou flown here? Hast thou credentials I may peruse?
And the reason why a good serial killer film works, and the reason why I do consider it horror, is because it does invoke a sense of dread in you in the idea that something like this could actually happen. And given the fact that Thomas Harris inspired many of his works on pre-existing serial killers, it says a lot for the way he wrote both Hannibal Lecter and even the killer in question, James Gumb. Silence of the Lambs is a film that really does show a lot of restraint, contrary to what people thought when the film first came out. And yes, it is still a very profoundly disturbing film. It's still a film that has remarkable restraint that refers to make you uncomfortable, not just in showing fucked up imagery, but also to try and tap into your subconscious to make you uncomfortable. And that's why I consider Hannibal Lecter to be one of the great villains of all time, because I feel like any villain who is able to have so much power in lieu of wherever they are or whatever their situation is, I feel like that's a villain that is a force to be reckoned with. And the thing that we have to note about why Hannibal Lecter is such a threat is that even though he is locked up, even though he is confined and has been so for a long time, the fact that people are still dreading the idea that he could still tap into your mind just by mere words alone and be able to make you feel things, so much so that he's able to talk a schizophrenic into swallowing his own tongue, that's someone you don't want to fuck with. The true horror is the idea that we ourselves as human beings are not comfortable in our own minds, and that all it takes is for someone incredibly skilled to be able to manipulate us to a point that we are unable to function properly. And that's a scary thought. Now, as I said in my previous video, yes, I do agree that possession does kind of fit in the paranormal subgenre of horror, but I feel like there's been a lot of emphasis on possession in a lot of different movies.
Lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
And of course I would consider that to be my favorite, since that is the horror film that scared the shit out of me at the age of 18. I'm not going to say it's my favorite, even though it is my favorite. And I think the reason why I'm not going to say it's my favorite, because it's my favorite, and I feel like there are so many other good examples that really deserve the spotlight. Now, a lot of people actually have said The Exorcism of Emily Rose really gave it the run for its money, and while I have not seen that film, I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. But there's a possession film I saw recently which absolutely blew my mind, because it took the concept in a route that is incredibly socially relevant, and that had a story that was fitting, frankly, some of the best that Rod Serling could ever do. And it's a recent film too. It came out last year, and I love it, and I strongly recommend people catch it. It's a film called The Cleansing Hour. The Cleansing Hour tells the story of a pair of scam artists who once were in the clergy, who had aspirations for the church, but decided to break away. One became a producer, and the other one decided to own the image of a priest, and they made a YouTube series where every episode they do a exorcism, but of course all of them are fake. Well, unfortunately, as these things go, the chickens come home to roost, and right when the producer's girlfriend decides to stand in as the victim in question, unfortunately, a real demon decides to step in and has decided to give them the ultimate test. Now, in order to save her soul, they have to follow what the demon says, all the while all their viewers are watching at the same time. A lot of it is also about these two scam artists. Now, in the beginning, you think they're just lying to their viewers, but as the progression of the story goes on, you find out they've been lying to each other to the point where one has been deliberately screwing over the other. And it gets to the point where you come to the realization, like, man, are these guys even worth saving? The ending is too good. And I laughed so hard at the way it ends, and it is mwah. Now, this particular subgenre is something of the bane to Joe Bob, because he has openly said a lot of horror films have been overly reliant on leaning too far into comedy. And I do feel some horror films lean too far into comedy because they doubt their ability to scare. And the best horror comedies I've encountered are ones that you wouldn't have expected to be comedies, but yet still have the capacity to say, Jesus fucking Christ. So with this, I'm not going to go the common route, because yes, I would say Shaun of the Dead is probably one of the best comedy horror films I've seen. And yes, we spent 2 episodes of Deep Cuts talking about another franchise of horror comedy. So with this, I'm going to focus my love on another film, which when I saw it, I did not expect it to be as funny as it turned out to be. That movie...
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
It will scare you to pieces.
When I first heard about it, everyone wanted to talk about the horrific elements to it, the blood, the gore, and of course the famous head-giving head scene. And all of this was in my mind when I finally said, yeah, I should probably get around to watching this thing because everyone keeps talking about it. I did not expect to laugh as fucking hard as I did on that movie. Both me and Lynn did not expect to love that movie as much as we did. We had already loved Jeffrey Combs because of The Frighteners, but man, this is just... I can understand why Jeffrey Combs keeps coming back to this role, and he has dropped little hints that he would want to do a 4th film. Granted, Stuart Gordon's gone. I mean, I don't know if Brian Usna would be up for it, but man, I would love it if a 4th film came around, and just to see more of Jeffrey Combs in the role of Herbert West. The film is based on the works of Lovecraft, and Lovecraft isn't exactly a humorous writer, but Stuart Gordon just somehow, some way, just decided to make this just a very tongue-in-cheek, humorous horror film that still has a lot of horrific horror elements, but because he is somehow able to find that blessed balance where when a movie wants to get funny, it can get funny. And I think because the performances are just that right level of cheese, not ham and cheese, just plain cheese, that it just seems to work, where you still are able to take the performances seriously, and the actors are still giving it their all, but yet when the movie wants to get funny, it gets funny. One of Lynn's notorious caveats is that she can't stand it when cats get killed in the film. So keep that in mind, because when the scene where Herbert West reanimates the cat and the cat starts attacking her, she laughed and I laughed and we laughed fucking hard. Re-Animator is a masterwork, and I think it really does need to be studied, not just for its merits as a low budget film, but also just in the idea of balancing tones, in the idea of employing humor, and yet still being able to be a legitimate horror film. So, cheers to Re-Animator. Another subgenre of film that has had much more success on television, admittedly, has also had a lot of good examples in cinema. And I feel the need to want to spotlight that as well in this second part, and that is the anthology horror film. I don't know any other genre of film that's been able to succeed in doing so well with the anthology subgenre other than horror. The one that really did set the template and really did set the example for what makes a great anthology film, so much so that a fantastic television series has come from it, that would be Creepshow. And from that, we've had a load of great stuff. We've had Monsters, we've had Tales from the Dark Side, we've had Tales from the Crypt. All of those are great. And I could go on all day showering praise on the Creepshow, and it is a great movie. I feel like the epicenter of a great anthology is to have a great framing device, and Creepshow does have a great one that they've been able to echo really well in the TV series. But if there's one anthology film that I feel deserves a load of love and praise and appreciation, and fortunately it does have a franchise, but I still feel it's an underground franchise, like one that I don't feel has been overly embraced by the masses. But frankly, in this day and age, with all the bullshit that's been going around, especially with Trump, with all the damage Trumpty Dumpty has done, and all the horrific things that have been done by the police, all done towards the towards the black community, all the stuff that has necessitated the Black Lives Matter movement. I feel if there's any film that was way ahead of the curve on this, that has been able to tell that through all of its stories was able to spotlight the necessity for things like the Black Lives Matter movement, that is Tales from the Hood. This is a film that I feel that as years have gone on, has really that has become eerily relevant. This is a film that actually has a lot of introspective moments too, that want to take the time to, you know, sit back and look into themselves to realize that, yeah, there's bad stuff outside, there's bad stuff inside as well. And Tales from the Hood does that in the stories that it tells. And every single one of those stories work. There's not a single bad story in the bunch, and all of them work. And some of them have ingredients that really do stray from what we're used to. I mean, especially the story involving the abusive father, played by David Alan Grier. You got to bear in mind, when this movie came out, David Alan Grier was only known as a comedy star thanks to his work on In Living Color. But here he is playing not just an abusive father, but a freaking intimidating one to boot. And the movie does not shy away from it. It has no problem showing the ugliness of what this guy does. Some would accuse it of not being subtle, but given the fact that all the stupid bullshit that this movie is calling out is still running rampant on the streets this very day, sometimes you just have to throw subtlety to the door and just flat out say, we're fucking sick of it. And this movie did it, and did it insanely well. The framing device that ties the whole story together is great in its own right. Part of the reason why I wasn't 100% like in love with the Mortuary Collection is because the framing device in that story was pretty similar to the framing device in Tales from the Hood. And as much as I love you, Clancy Brown, and how great you were, and I'm very happy you got your Fangoria Chainsaw Award for the Mortuary Collection, I'm sorry, you ain't got nothing on Clarence Williams III.
Oh, the shit. You'll get the shit. You'll be knee deep in the shit.
Now, one could say I could have slotted this into international, but I feel that this genre has kind of ascended beyond being an international concept and really has been openly embraced as a subgenre in itself beyond the country that it originated in. Now, that, of course, is the giallo. Now, the giallo is, of course, Italian for yellow, specifically kind of like how Sin City is like representative of the pulp comic novels in America. The giallo was the kind of pulp comic novels, you know, or the pulp noir novels from Italy. And of course, when people think of the giallo, of course, they think of greats like Lucio Fulci, Mario Bava, Dario Argento. And yes, the film that I widely consider to be my favorite giallo is from Dario Argento. One of my favorites of his work is Tenebrae. The idea of a serial killer mimicking the works of a author's books. This is the movie that took that concept and flipped it on its head. And it's a premise that always works. It's one I always do enjoy, because it always does call into question the idea of whether or not we create the psychos, or the psychos just needed that they were already crazy to begin with and they just needed that push. This is a film that starts off with that idea, but then it just pulls the rug out from under you in an ingenious twist that I seriously didn't see coming until like the closing minutes. Like once they were inching towards, I was like, oh, are you fucking kidding me? And I loved it for it. And whereas I did love Deep Red for its tension and its capacity to really make you intrigued with the plot and just make me really kind of, you know, uneasy about everything that was going on, Tenebrae was the one that excited me just because of the ingenuity of the plot. Tenebrae is easily one of my favorite of Dario Argento's, not just for the story, but also because of Argento's technique. There is one continuous crane shot that I still, for the life of me, have no idea how he pulled it off. For as much as I love Deep Red, Tenebrae is my pick. I decided to save this subgenre till now because I really wanted to talk about this because, again, going back to Argento, my favorite film in the witches subgenre is another one from Dario Argento. You know it, I love it. Both versions, check back to my review on the other one, is...
But the iris is the flower that will mean the end of it.
I've said everything I love about the remake. In that review, I absolutely love the fact that it still had the story of the original movie, but was able to flesh it out and make it its own thing, and did not feel beholden to the original to be able to be its own thing. And what it is on its own is hypnotic, it's haunting, and I absolutely loved it. But if you had to ask me which is the one I'm going to watch more, yeah, I'm going to watch the original Suspiria a lot more. For the very simple fact that, yes, the story is a lot simpler in it, but also visually it is utterly stunning. The lighting in that movie is unrivaled. Goblin is at their peak in that movie. Very few times do I have an orchestral score on my playlist on my phone to drive to work to, but I won't lie, there are times I have driven to work listening to the theme to Suspiria on a loop. I cannot get enough of that theme song. It is great. It's one thing to say that a horror film has imagery that is so affecting that you can't look at it. But to me, it says a lot more when there's a horror film that has that foobar imagery and you can't look away. And Suspiria has that in drove. Eli Roth famously said that Dario Argento puts the gore in gorgeous. And I don't think any other movie in his catalog has been able to emulate that concept better than Suspiria. And if you want proof, just look at the early kill at the very beginning involving the skylight. It's one of those ones where I wince at the look of it, but man, I can't look away. But since I've already sung praise on one horror remake, I suppose the final horror subgenre I need to talk about is the horror remake. Now, remakes is a plague that's been going through all of movies nowadays. It's not just exclusively horror. But the one thing I can definitely say in horror's benefit, horror actually has a better track record with remakes, more than most people know. Of course, I'm going to say my favorite one, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people will agree with me on this, is John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. Yeah, it's a great film. I could default in calling that my favorite, but I feel the need to save talking about that film for a later date. But the one thing that this horror remake has over The Thing is that this one was a box office smash when it came out, and people immediately loved it when it came out, whereas The Thing was not loved in the beginning and gradually had to rise to its status as the best horror remake. So my pick for the best horror remake, one that still freaking haunts me and I'm freaking timid to watch it again.
Help me, please.
Oh yeah, we're going into David Cronenberg land. Oh yeah, the father of body horror. I'm pretty sure preceding Cronenberg, there have been films that have talked about fear people feel about, the stuff that's inside us that is coming out to kill us. But I don't think anyone's ever done it the way Cronenberg has, and I don't think that it's been brought out to its peak like it was in The Fly. The original Fly is a B movie, and it always has been, and it never had delusions of being anything else. And the idea that Mel Brooks, of all people, was going to produce a remake of it, and he gave the reins over to David Cronenberg and gave him full carte blanche to do his own thing with it, that was probably the best move he could have ever done, because David Cronenberg decided to take the B-movie premise of a scientist who accidentally gets genetically crossbred with a common housefly. He was able to turn it into something absolutely horrific as a almost parallel to the idea of what happens when you have to watch a loved one decay in front of your very eyes and become something absolutely nightmarish that you are almost reluctant to ever look at. The Fly remake is a film that has transcended so far beyond its original. The only thing people remember of the original is the final scene with the spider. But the remake of The Fly was a film that made you just absolutely squirm in your own seat because you're horrified at the notion of this ever happening to you. And the great gift of David Cronenberg was his ability to make you uncomfortable in your own skin, and that's something that really does shine the most in this one. And now I take it upon myself to nominate the other two to tell us their favorites in 10 horror subgenres. Now, the rules for this are as follows. They, of course, can abide by the list that I laid down in my first video, but as Triv pointed out to me, it's my list, so I can do whatever the fuck I want, so therefore they can do whatever the fuck they want. They can either go with the original list that I laid down from the first video, or they can even borrow a couple from mine. So, numbers 3 and 4 I'm nominating. Of course, I'm nominating Logan Donahue. Now, for those who may remember, Logan Donahue was the one who gave me the might and majesty of Frank Henenlotter when he showed me Frankenhooker. He also appeared in the Hell Comes to Frogtown episode, and we also reviewed the cinematic masterpiece Cats. It's not all he has to offer. You can also find him on his YouTube channel. You can also find him riffing on bad movies on Trash Cinema 101 on Twitch. So definitely check him out there. And for my nominee, the absolutely adorable movie Apprentice. Ah yes, this lad so wise in the ways of cinema, but yet I feel there is still more that he needs to dig into. So I'm going to challenge him thus, to be able to offer his favorites in the realm of horror. So all of you, you have been challenged. Accept it if you know what's good for you. Yeah, I'm in a bathroom. Those are my additional picks for my favorites of some of the many subgenres of horror. After all that, leave it in the comment section. I want to know what are your favorites in the subgenres I've talked about in the previous 2 videos. And more importantly, I'm going to ask the primary question, what scares you?